So this is step 2 of cellular respiration, which is the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle starts with the pyruvic acid from glycolysis. So let's go back to where we made that. Remember, in glycolysis we started off with that 6-carbon glucose molecule and ended up with 2 pyruvic acids. And those 2 pyruvic acids right here are going to go into the mitochondria and now go through the Krebs cycle. So here are those pyruvic acids, the 3 molecules. Now if you notice, there was 2 of them. Here's a pyruvic acid, here's the other pyruvic acid. And they're going to take turns going through the Krebs cycle. This one will go through, then this one will go through. So here's my pyruvic acids. It's a 3-carbon molecule. And what happens is I break off a carbon, and now I only have a 3-carbon molecule. So this pyruvic acid that was 3 carbons breaks 1 carbon off to form a 2-carbon molecule that's now called acetyl-CoA. Now I don't want to just leave this carbon hanging, so what happens is I breathe in oxygen, that oxygen attaches to this carbon, so 1 carbon and O2 is CO2, which is carbon dioxide. So then I breathe out carbon dioxide, and now I've got this 2-carbon molecule called acetyl-CoA. And this 2-carbon molecule is going to go in this cycle. So here's a 4-carbon molecule. I combine it with the 2-carbon molecule to make a 6-carbon molecule. That 6-carbon molecule is called citric acid. And you may think, well, didn't we start all of this with a 6-carbon molecule? Yeah, back here we started with glucose that was a 6-carbon molecule. But remember, glucose is really this 6-carbon molecule with a bunch of other atoms on the outside of it. And citric acid is the same thing. Citric acid, yes, it does have 6 carbons, but it has completely different atoms on the outside. So it's a different molecule. But the reason we do that is because we want to build things up just to break them down. And I know your teacher used the example of like little kids like to build up like blocks of skyscrapers and then knock them down and stuff like that. And that's kind of the same thing is true here. We had this glucose so that we could break it down and make some ATP and make these electron carriers or these electron Ubers called NADH. And we did that, and we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to build things up just so we can break them down and make some more ATP and make some electron carriers. So yes, we're kind of back where we started with a 6-carbon molecule, but it's a different 6-carbon molecule, and we have gained some ATP and some electron carriers called NADH. So anyway, so this 4-carbon molecule attaches to the 2-carbon molecule to make a 6-carbon molecule. We do the same thing again. We break off a carbon, can't leave it hanging, breathe in some oxygen, it attaches to that carbon that I break off, and so we breathe out carbon dioxide. And now we're down to a 5-carbon molecule. Same thing happens. Break off a carbon, breathe in some oxygen, attach it to the carbon, breathe out carbon dioxide, and now we're down to a 4-carbon molecule. And there is some other funky reactions that happen with these 4-carbon molecules, and we'll talk about that in a second. But what's important about doing this, about breaking down these molecules, is every time we break off a carbon, whether it's up here or here or here or any of these weird reactions that are happening over here, anytime we break a molecule, we release an electron. And so we have to get another electron carrier, another Uber for the electrons. So when we break this carbon off, we bring in an NAD to have an NADH that's going to be an Uber for our electron that's going to take it to the electron transport chain. Here again, we break off the 6-carbon molecule. We break one off to make it 5. So we released an electron that's going to take the NAD and make an NADH, and that's going to go to the electron transport chain. So basically every time we break off one of these carbons, we release an electron, and we're either making more NADHs that are going to go into the electron transport chain, there's another one over there, or there's a new molecule that we call FADH2 that's the same thing essentially. It's still a carrier for electrons. It's still an Uber for those electrons. And all of these carriers, the NADH, 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 and FADH2, all are carrying electrons and are going to take them into the electron transport chain. The other thing that we do during all of this breaking down is we make more ATP. So keep in mind that this is going to happen twice, because one pyruvic acid is going to go through the Krebs cycle, then the other pyruvic acid is going to go through the electron transport chain, through the Krebs cycle. So we're going to make quite a few more NADHs and FADH2s and ATPs. So where are we at with all of this? So remember, the glucose made pyruvic acid in the cytoplasm during glycolysis, and we made an NADH that's going to go over to the electron transport chain, and we made 2 ATP. Then this pyruvic acid came into the mitochondria and went through the Krebs cycle. In the Krebs cycle, we made NADH and FADH2s, the electron carriers that are also going to go into the electron transport chain, and we made 2 more ATP. So what is our input? Our input was 2 pyruvic acids. So the pyruvic acids we made in the glycolysis were inputs. I guess technically you could also say oxygen was an input here too, because we needed oxygen to be able to make these CO2s. So the output was CO2, because every time we broke off a carbon, we attached it to an oxygen and got rid of a carbon dioxide. We made some ATP, and then we also made some more electron carriers, the NADH, and this time a new one called FADH2. So if we kind of go back to this equation we were doing before, let's see what we've addressed now. So we addressed glucose here, which started the whole process. We now have addressed some of the oxygen, because remember, we had to keep bringing in oxygen in all these locations every time we broke off a carbon. So we've now used some oxygen. We have now also made carbon dioxide. Every time we broke off the carbon and added oxygen to it, and we made carbon dioxide. So we've now given off carbon dioxide, and we've made 2 more ATP. We made 2 here, and we made 2 here. Really, the only thing we haven't addressed so far is the water, and we're going to address that when we start talking about the electron transport chain, because that's where most of the ATP is actually going to be made.